now introduce our opening speaker, who's Dr. Patty Brennan. We're so thrilled that she could join us. She needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it because we have such a diverse crowd. So Dr. Brennan is the director of the National Library of Medicine, which is the world's largest biomedical library and producer of digital information services used by scientists, health professionals, and members of the public worldwide. Since assuming that directorship 3 years ago, Dr. Brennan has positioned the library to be the hub of data science at NIH and is a national and international leader in the field. And she spearheaded the development of the new strategic plan that envisions NLM as a platform for biomedical discovery and data-powered health. She came to NIH from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, where she was the Lillian L. Molman Bascom Professor at the School of Nursing and College of Engineering. And in her illustrious professional career, she has used her multidisciplinary training in engineering, information technology, and nursing on numerous projects, too many to count, to improve public health and ensure the best possible experience in patient care. She's a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing, the American College of Medical Informatics, and the New York Academy of Medicine. And as past president of the American Medical Informatics Association, Dr. Patty Brennan was elected to the Institute of Medicine, which is now the National Academy of Medicine, in 2001. So we're honored to have her here, and thank you so much.
Welcome to my home. Actually, this is our porch. Our house is over there. I see some wonderful familiar faces in the audience, and I'm really happy to see these lovely investment over now. Is it 5 years you've been moving this agenda? 3 years, moving this agenda forward. It's a lot that's been accomplished. I guess I didn't realize it had such shallow roots, but big, broad reach. Mobilizing computable biomedical knowledge is essential to be able to improve the health of the public, and it cannot happen without outstanding research, but also policy activities, clinical practice change, and increasingly reliance on resources such as the National Library of Medicine to be the connector and the holder. I'm here today to talk to you about what my view is of what I think the National Library of Medicine can do, but I'm going to stop by 10 o'clock at the latest to hear your views of what you want from us. The National Library of Medicine is a national resource, it's a federal resource, and it should be accelerating the building and application of knowledge, and that is why we're here today to have this conversation. I'd like to begin with a brief video, and I could do that if I had, oh, there we go, have the clicker. Could we advance one? There we go. And we have no sound. Are the AV people in the room? Could you check the sound for me, please? And greetings to the people who are online, by the way. We ready to go? No hands. The National Library of Medicine is best known through its services, and yet we stand with you as a partner in the cycle of bringing research into practice and learning from practice to drive new research. In order to do those things, the library must be more than a building here in Bethesda. It must be a place and a motivator and an accelerator of the tools that are needed. I am going to be focusing most of my remarks on models and modeling. This is a particularly important focus at the National Library of Medicine right now. Not to diminish our focus on data, I'll be returning to that in a few minutes, and not to diminish our focus on, of course, the literature. But I'm going to start with the comment that almost everybody wants when they first talk to me: what about the money? And when will you fund us? So I'm very excited to be able to announce that NIH is planning to offer a new funding instrument starting in September of this year, a U54 mechanism, which is a research resource mechanism. This research resource mechanism will be of particular interest to this community because it's designed to foster the building of repositories and utilities that can be reused across the country. I hope you'll take a look at this funding announcement when it comes out. I'm very excited about it myself because what we realize is while the NIH and the National Library of Medicine in particular can serve as a repository, it will never be the only repository. In addition to that, the National Library of Medicine has launched 2 funding initiatives that may be of interest to you. The first is an initiative called Computational Approaches to Curation at Scale. We recognize that the large amount of data coming out of clinical practice requires an early application of metadata, particularly to make it useful to researchers. The computational approaches to curation at scale is an attempt to take both biological as well as clinical data and make it accessible and reusable. The second funding announcement that I want to bring to your attention is actually not a specific announcement, but a guide notice. And the guide notice states that the NLM is particularly concerned about making sure that data sets can be properly used. And in order to properly use them, we need to be able to classify and characterize the extent of bias, of missingness, of sparseness in the data set so that individuals attempting to use machine learning algorithms, natural language programming strategies, have some idea that they can operate on the data set with trust. We are accepting both R01 mechanism and R03 funding opportunities under those. So we're investing a lot, and we hope this investment helps you. But I'm going to return now to my comments about models and where I see us going with models. Whoops, excuse me. And our focus on models is primarily to ensure, first and foremost, the rigor of the modeling techniques that are used. The rigor, the trustability, the ability for a clinician to understand and to believe that the recommendations that are provided are in fact accurate. Second, we need to focus on reproducibility. And I'd like to think of reproducibility in 2 ways. Can we redo what we actually just told you to do? Can we actually create the same recommendation in the same way? But also, can we move that reproducibility to a new environment using the same kind of data? That's an example of reproducibility where we're bringing new data sets into the same operation. And finally, for reuse. Reuse is a challenge in this community right now because of the unique nature of institutional approaches to managing information. At the present time, even the National Library of Medicine needs to reconstruct many of our useful algorithms to operate within the new computational environments that they are operating in. So we understand that reuse is more than an aspirational challenge. We understand that reuse of models is, in fact, a technical challenge. The National Library of Medicine has committed to 3 key activities in this area. First and foremost, to make data sets fair and ready for advanced analytics. Excuse me. This actually is a commitment across the federal government right now. There's been a great deal of discussion in the Machine Learning AI Subcommittee of the Office of Science Technology Policy to make sure that all federally funded data are as accessible as possible for accelerating the development of new methodologies. And we are committed to doing this with respect both to the data that NIH supports the collection and creation of during research, as well as to the extent possible our operational data at NIH. Second, we are committed to the National Library of Medicine focuses on the creation of generalizable, scalable, and reusable models. What we do different at NLM compared to our sister institutes across the NIH is we focus on the generalizability of modeling strategies. Whereas in other institutes, problem-inspired application of advanced analytics is of prime importance, the goal there being to solve a clinical problem or to discover a new biological truth. At the National Library of Medicine, however, our interests are actually in understanding when models can be used and when they can't be used, how to make sure they're scalable to other operations or not scalable. The idea of creating reusable models that can be applied to multiple data sets is a particular challenge. And it's actually quite a controversial challenge. I'll be interested in your thoughts about this. I've been told on a number of occasions, you can't evaluate a model without the data that it was generated on. You can't reuse a model without having some kind of isomorphism between the new data and the old data. Perhaps true, but we can gain insights, and to accelerate the knowledge we need for practice, we need to find ways to have models reusable and to know when they are reusable. And finally, the National Library of Medicine is committed to creating collections of literature, of data, of models, and providing the grammar and the structure and declaration elements to make sure these are findable. Creating the 21st century collection of biomedical knowledge and supporting its use broadly requires, first of all, that we define what the collection consists of in a much broader way than we have in the past. So first and foremost, we recognize that text is and will be for a long period of time a key vehicle for scientific communication. Articles will be our primary substance that we integrate and make available to the community. However, articles still, for just in the very, very early stage of being able to be machine interpreted, we're still mostly relying on human reading. And let me just let you know, the National Library of Medicine brings in 1 million new citations to PubMed every single year. So in the last 20 minutes, we've brought in over 60 citations, and you are so far behind. And if we continue to believe that we will have computable biomedical knowledge, we have to find some other way than expecting people to read and synthesize it. We have to make better use of teams. We have to make better engagement with the literature. And I am particularly committed to evaluating how we manage text and how we display text to the public. Over the next 3 months, we'll be releasing a new version of PubMed. PubMed 2.0 is going to bring to the public a new and more flexible interface. You can evaluate it right now. If you Google PubMed Labs, you'll be able to see some of our new features. PubMed 2.0 is going to have a couple of key elements, a much more streamlined interface, a much easier to navigate set of filters to put on data, but importantly, it will provide your citations in a relevance-based ranking model as well as a chronological model. So presently, we present citations back to you in a model of reverse chronology, that is the most recent citations first. But we know 80% of the people who come to PubMed never go to the second page. So if the article that you need to help guide a practice, or your own article that's so revolutionary is on page 3, you're dead. It's never going to be seen. So we need to find a way to get that information in front of people. Working with the machine learning algorithms, Jean Lou's group has brought together over 1,000 features to create a relationship among the elements of our corpus, and then a behavioral overlay for the individual searcher at the moment of search, so that what gets presented by the choice of the searcher is now a relevance-based ranking. And we've already been hearing from people that this is getting them to more accurate citations more quickly. So we're really very pleased about that. You'll still be able to get the old citation pattern in reverse chronological order. In addition, though, we realize because people need to read to understand text, that is our primary mode of interpretation still, we're putting on the search page, the search results page, what we call snippets, a couple of lines from the actual abstract to identify exactly what in the search box has triggered this article to appear in the list. We hope that'll make it more efficient for individuals to be able to, with fewer clicks, find the articles that are relevant to them. But that's the permanent discoverable archival text. And while it's a very important part of our operation, 20 to almost 30 million citations, it's not the totality of our operation. So we are beginning to evaluate how we can index and collect and make accessible models, pipelines, protocols, and importantly, data. The library of the future is not going to be housed in a single site. It will be both a custodial collection that we hang on to, but will be increasingly interconnections to other elements, to other data repositories, to other model uses. So we are envisioning a library of the future where connectivity is critical. In order to do that, we must foster standard approaches to nomenclature, formatting, and transmission of key information. We are listening to the trends in science and scientific communication. We at National Library of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health overall is committed to open science principles and to broad-based data sharing. It's our expectation that this will accelerate new knowledge and accelerate new opportunities for growth. We've been asked to evaluate in a number of cases how to better connect with preprints, how to better access the preprints and the other interim products of research, which may be a pipeline or a model. At the present time, the National Library of Medicine will not become a preprint server. However, we are exploring ways to work closely with those preprint services, such as bioRxiv, who are able to provide us citation information in the XML format to be able to link from PubMed, the search engine, to the articles, the repository for preprint services. This is at very early exploration stage. We're testing out how to make sure that we maintain the level of confidence and credibility we have in the information. We also need to maintain version control and version accuracy, but we recognize preprints are becoming an emerging point of scientific communication. The National Library of Medicine is also committed deeply to data sharing. In the fall of this year, you'll be seeing a draft policy for data sharing from the NIH. Many of you who work with genomic data are already aware of the NIH's genome data sharing policy, but we plan to expand data sharing to include it to be a scorable aspect of all new research programs beginning in about 18 months. We will be encouraging investigators to share, and I'll be talking to you in a few minutes about the repository strategies we're looking into. And we are preparing and leading, in some cases, new directions in scientific communication through collaboration. We're looking at how to best use animation or augmented reality or virtualization of information and text into visual cues so that we are able to accelerate the adoption of new and important ideas. We envision, in fact, a future where the world is a sphere of discovery, where digital research objects are interconnected, each of these objects having a specific identifier, DOI or some other type of identifier, that allows us to connect to it in permanence. We are recognizing in the yellow oval, the literature is where our strong suit has been overall, but we're working closely with NIH to connect people, the instruments they use for our common data elements repository, our funding strategies and funding advancements, but increasingly in the upper left-hand part of the globe, protocols, models, and code. We need to find a more effective way than GitHub to store the knowledge that's building, and we need to find ways to ensure that the community does the curation and the scientific judgment while the library does its job at connecting and closing. Let me speak about two other advances that are happening here at NIH that I believe will accelerate the initiatives important to this community. First is identifying people. We are now encouraging all investigators who are funded through the NIH to obtain and use an ORCID ID. This will make it much easier to connect individuals, the data that they generate, the work that they're doing, the literature that they provide, and we hope it will make it more accessible to individuals. We are advancing funding opportunities across the NIH. As I identified earlier, the U54 mechanism is a trans-NIH initiative to create new ways of supporting the repositories of data and models and other kinds of tools, including visualization strategies. In addition, though, the National Library of Medicine is expanding our emphasis on standards. As of about 18 months ago, we appointed Dr. Clem McDonald as the Chief Health Data Standard Officer of the National Library of Medicine. In this role, we have now a connecting point to accelerate the appropriate use of nomenclature, formatting, and messaging standards, not only in the clinical arena, which we're quite well known in, but also for the research arena. This is going to be a surprise to some of our investigators. The NIH is committed, though, to embracing the FHIR standard as a way of communicating research data. The NIH is also committed to improving the use of common data elements, which will allow us to better reuse knowledge from one research project in another because the terminologies will remain the same. We are also expanding our emphasis on data repositories and data storage. So let me talk a little bit about that and how we're going in these areas. We recognize that the NIH making a statement that we encourage open access data sharing repositories has to be accompanied with some guidance to do this. We have three options at present for scaled implementation of high-value data sets. First, for very small data sets, 2 gigabytes or less, they can be appended to a PubMed Central article. We are creating a unique identifier for data sets. Eventually, we will be able to search by data sets. At the present time, though, you can launch a PubMed Central search or even a PubMed search and use the filter has data and find research articles that have data. This, we believe, is going to not only accelerate the reuse of research data, but we think it's going to be an amazing teaching aid. Second, for data sets that are larger, and NIH defines data sets that are larger up to 20 gigabytes, public repositories such as Dryad or Figshare are important partners. We have a mechanism, we have a relationship with these public repositories to link data sets to specific articles, even if the data and the article are essentially deposited at 2 different points in time. So we're constantly, on a daily basis, refreshing our connections to Dryad and to Figshare to make sure that we are able to access the data sets. NIH is getting ready to launch an NIH-specific Figshare application. If you take a look at NSF Figshare, you'll get a sense of the direction we're going with NIH Figshare. Now, we do know that Figshare accepts data sets up to 200 gigabytes. The 20 gigabyte recommendation was a recommendation from the NIH. The NIH has now launched an initiative called Strides, which is a way to manage scientific data in cloud instances. We have made relationships with 2 cloud providers, AWS and Google. We've provisioned space, and we will be increasingly making data sets available here. I am absolutely delighted to tell you that as of July 31st, the publicly accessible data in our Sequence Read archive will be available to the public through Amazon, AWS, and through Google, available for anyone to interrogate, to explore, to use. This represents a major accomplishment that we've done the ETL process, the extract, transfer, and load processing of the data sets over about the last 3 months. 2 days, we almost brought down Internet 2 with the amount of traffic that was going through. But we've done it. We have 5 petabytes of data there. This is non-human, publicly accessible data, but we will, within a very short period of time, probably by the end of the calendar year, have human data, have dbGaP in the cloud. We are putting in place a very strong identity and access management scheme with the NIH to be sure that we both allow the individual institutes to control permissions to access data, but we have one central place where identity will be managed. You may be wondering, what about individuals who are not related to NIH? How will they get access to NIH-based information in the cloud? And for our public data, and no NIH relationship is required. For our human-held data, there will need to be an application through an NIH IC, not necessarily for funding, but for permission to access the data, the details of which will be forthcoming. The librarians in the room know that I've just described the most horrendous mess of locating things possible. Stuff will be everywhere, and our job of a library is to make sure stuff that is everywhere is connected. So we are beginning to put together a series of data repository enumerations, directory services, and discovery models, and this will be emerging over the next couple of weeks. Right now, you can come directly to the NIH Data Sharing Repositories page and at least find a human-readable enumeration of the repositories and the current access permissions. How do you get to them? Are they accepting submissions, or are they closed? Is there support for them? This allows an individual interested in locating a data set to find data sets that are already available, but it requires human search. And frankly, it's not easy to connect 2 data sets in this file. You have to actually extract both of them and connect them yourselves. We're working to improve that. We're working into the STRIDES initiative, we're working with Google to improve data discovery and improve our ability to have access to information. Data alone are not enough. Having access to data alone are not enough. We need to be having the models as rigorously and as clearly described as possible. So in my next few minutes, I want to present to you the 10 simple rules of credible practice for modeling that the Interagency Modeling and Simulation Group and the Multiscale Modeling Consortium here at NIH and across the government has produced. These rules are available at the URL that's on the screen. My slides will be available to all of you in the slide packet, so just sit back and enjoy the trip for a few minutes. When you are trying to reuse models, the very most important first step is to develop and document the subject, the application, the purpose, and the intended use of the modeling or simulation. And as of yesterday, we also recognize the importance in this context to define any intellectual property or IP constraints on the model and the data the model have been built on. Simply having data open and shareable does not resolve some of the legal issues of IP. We can talk about that later. Once the context is defined, using appropriate data is essential for effective model building. Employing relevant and traceable information in the development or operation of the modeling or simulation adds to the credibility, adds to its ability to be reused because the intended downstream user is able to access the development phase. Third, evaluate within context. That's where this context statement is so important in the beginning. The verification and validation of models is an incredibly complex task, and many, many books have been read about this. What you read over and over again is that it's an impossible Herculean task that must be done and is never done very well. But having a context within which one can verify and validate the models and express with some confidence the uncertainty quantification and sensitivity analysis of the model allows, again, the subsequent downstream user to be able to know with trust where that model can be used. Next, we consider what the limitations are. The model developer often is the one that knows the limitations best, but in the future users of the models may be able to contribute to these. One of the reasons why I believe it's essential to think about some type of a repository of models is to allow continued community engagement about experiences, particularly around the limitations and uses of models. Next is the importance of managing version control. Our structures in the literature have taught us how to manage a final product, but models are dynamic, and being able to appropriately identify what phase of the model, what stage of the model is being used is going to help with its future use and reproducibility. Nobody believes this is important. I have a degree in engineering. I never had a class in documentation, but documenting models adequately is absolutely a challenge that we must take on as a community. Documenting models includes not only documenting the development and intended use of the model, but also subsequent applications and considerations in users' guides. I've often wondered why we don't have an industry building up to be able to actually take care of documentation, but I think it's something we're going to help our investigators become more skilled with. What the library is working to do with the modeling community is to develop the grammars and the metadata for model declaration. Oops, excuse me. Disseminate broadly. Dissemination of models will only happen if we have a place to point people to, and that's again why I believe a repository of models is really going to be an essential part. Exactly where that will live, I don't know. I have to say very honestly, I do not see us bringing models into the repositories here physically at the National Library of Medicine, in part because we have the partnership with the journal editors that bring an enormous quality control over the literature. We don't have that same quality control over the models, and I think we will see a scheme that develops somewhat like we're seeing preprints develop. That is, there will be a public repository that one can point to and that has commentary on. Acquiring independent reviews of models is another challenge, not familiar in our field at all, but it needs to be done in the future, where not only the model builder identifies the strength of the model, but others who have used the model are able to help with the evaluation of it. Creating and documenting, testing, completing implementations of models will be critical for clinical facilities where the local culture, the local information flows, and the local requirements in an institution might alter the ability of a model to be useful. And finally, conforming to standards. Models have very few standards. They're just beginning to emerge, and I was really pleased to see the standards working group here may be the group that actually advances the suite of standards that can be useful for bringing models into a reusable and important part of the future. I close now with reminding you that one of our contributions is to encourage the NIH to move into the standards environment within about, the 18th, on around July 29th, we anticipate releasing a guide notice that encourages researchers to use the FHIR format to capture, integrate, and exchange clinical data for research purposes and to enhance capabilities to share research data. We're going to be looking for the reaction of the community to see how well does this work, because this particular community lives at the intersection of research and clinical practice. Your guidance will be particularly helpful here. I thank you for your attention and for the work that you do, and I now have time to take your advice. Questions or comments? Yes, please.
Hi, so I'd actually like to give you a cautionary warning about standardizing on FHIR. I wouldn't move too quickly with it. We've been trying to actually do research with FHIR data at RPI, and it can be very difficult to actually use it in practice.
Thank you. We are actually, oh dear, I'm echoing. We're quite aware that there are many. First of all, the FHIR is an emerging format, and in its emergence, it is taking on different forms and different implementations. Secondly, the FHIR lacks the internal structure that sometimes would make data be much more useful. The guide notice that's being released by NIH is a permissive guide notice. That is to say, we want to get experience with this. What we want to stop, very honestly, is legions of research nurses looking at a screen and transcribing on paper only to re-enter into a computer system information that began in an electronic health record. The use of the FHIR standard is essential for success of the All of Us program, but actually deploying that over 3,500 hospitals and 14,000 clinical facilities isn't particularly an easy process. We believe that the NIH standing behind the ONC's use of the recommendation of the use of the FHIR standard will actually add both to the research environment as well as to the clinical practice. But I do take your caution. Thank you. Blackford, hey.
Well, hey, Patty, thank you so much for a terrific opener for this conference. and for your leadership and impact, not only at the NLM, but across the country and all that you're doing. It's terrific. You know, my question is about kind of the final common mile, if you will. I fully subscribe to the vision of accelerating the translation of new knowledge into practice, and I think you're outlining the steps and methods and means by which that can actually begin to happen, starting at the NIH. You and many, all of us, are acutely aware, though, of the challenges still, even with the emerging standards, of getting this stuff back into practice. So my question is, how do we take the power and gravitas of the NLM, add it to the ONC, add it to the NIH, and influence Congress to act in a way that fulfills the vision of 21st century cures and, you know, eliminates information blocking and opens the record to external innovations that can arise from this kind of MCBK?
Thanks very much, Blackford, for that daunting challenge this early in the morning. I'm going to actually sound like I'm backpedaling for a minute, but I'm not. The very first and most important thing we must do is be very clear and upfront that research use of clinical data must be governed by regulations, human subjects oversight, patient privacy, so that anything that we do has to have, first and foremost, the protection of the rights of the individual. In addition, though, we have to protect the rights of the institution to avoid unnecessary scrutiny, to allow institutions to innovate as they can. So I recognize that the challenges of encouraging information sharing while avoiding the risk to the institution and the individual. I believe that the NIH has to put money behind this. And part of putting money behind this means, as you will see in the fall, that we will be allowing as direct cost on research grants the cost to make data fair, make data accessible. Our partnerships with the pharmaceutical industries, with the healthcare delivery industries require us to look at how we can get cost efficiencies from standards. And what we want to, and the way we place our conversations, is actually helping people to think about the long tail. That is, that the adoption and embracing and implementation of standards initially is an upfront lift. It is an upfront cost. The purpose of engaging a research operation is to monitor to be sure that the upfront costs have the downstream payoffs and doesn't lead to continued upfront costs. I'm very pleased to say that Dr. Collins has got the standards bug. And so when he speaks to Congress now, or when Dr. Lowy from the NCI speaks to Congress about 21st century cures, they're working into their conversations the need to make sure that data collected once in the point of care propagates into knowledge building. And that messaging, I think, is going to also be really critical as we provide testimony to Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Good morning. Siva Madhavan, Georgetown University. Thank you for your leadership and your inspiration.
Nice to see you.
Wonderful talk, as always. My question is related to the previous comment and the discussion about case-level data.
Yes.
There are many research programs that are funded by NIH that are now slowly inching towards large-scale broad sharing of case-level information, secure sharing of data, de-identified information, and so on. Are there specific plans in the roadmap of NLM to really help define this broader large-scale sharing of case-level data? And the reason I ask is every institution and research program is coming up with their own solution. And I think having sort of a broader integrated guideline for case-level data sharing will help programs like ClinGen, the CRDCs at NCI, and others. Thank you.
We are recognizing that the variety of expression of phenotyping case-level data is actually going to be a block to the research community. And yet, if I've learned anything in this job, I've learned that there's no head nurse of NIH, and there's absolutely no way to impose a standard. So we believe through consensus building and coordination, we will be able to set templates and models of representational models of effective ways to establish case-level data. We recognize that particularly individual participant data in clinical trials is actually a gold mine of information because it is collected in a somewhat more systematic way. And we're finding greater interest from our pharmaceutical partners to opening their data repositories. That has a value in the openness. It has a challenge in the diversity of the expression. And so I believe we're going to go through a period of about 5 years where we're trying to move towards better alignment. But I think alignment will be coming. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, I also wanted to thank you. The focus on models is not one that I've heard before laid out so clearly, and so that's really great. The comment earlier about difficulty of possibly working with fire.
Yes.
I do want to say that I've been super impressed by the way FHIR has taken over the world in the last couple of years. All of us, I believe, is also standardizing to some degree on the OMOP Odyssey model.
Yes.
And I don't know, I just wanted to get those words out there because when you combine the transfer standard along with a simplification of a data model standard and common data elements, it seems like you do get to the point that you can do some interoperability and standardization of models.
So I had a consultation with Brad Mallon last week from Vanderbilt, who's involved with the All of Us, who told me that we should not release anything about FHIR unless we're willing to say FHIR and OMOP in the same sentence. And I have to say, one step at a time, please. But we do recognize that the All of Us embracing of the OMOP standard is really going to take us a lot farther in getting good content information in place. FHIR itself, the informatics people in the room are probably stunned to see me talking at all about standards because I've spent my career avoiding this area completely. And yet now I have to, it's part of my job. But what I recognize is nothing in the informatics community in the last 30 years has moved like FHIR has. It is astounding to me. Now, it's moved because it's flexible. And the flexibility, it's a problem a little bit too. So I think on one hand, we should be grateful that we've gotten such quick adoption and cautious that we, like with any standard, we don't want to hit premature closure with it. We don't want to freeze things in too early. I do recognize also the limitations of our current structures of terminologies, and our current common data elements are heavily weighted towards episodic care, heavily weighted towards illness and pathology, and frankly heavily weighted towards an approach to care that is point in time as opposed to the process of an individual. So we're looking to the social and behavioral determinants community to really help us expand to make sure that the language of health matches the experience of health. Yes, hi Harold, how are you?
Thank you, and great presentation. I just have a small point. I think so many people think that informatics is a plumbing service and that we deliver stuff.
Yep.
And I think it would be helpful for the field to list on the left-hand side is great, but the right-hand side is the open questions.
Okay.
All the things we don't know what to do, and that it would be great to get all these smart kids who are doing AI and machine learning only to focus on some of these higher level issues, and that things are not fixed and we don't know what's going on. So I think that would be helpful.
I think that would be really, really helpful, and I think that actually helping to temper the hype with the reality of the challenges that are both interesting and really difficult to handle is going to be a very important part. The National Academies is launching a new interest group on innovation, and part of the innovation working group, interest group rather, is around how do we get the grand challenges, now that we have tools in place, how do we stop people from solving stupid problems or giving recommendations that can't be adopted and really move into the more complex problem. And I am cautiously optimistic that that can happen if we get to the students and the trainees. I think that's the right space. One or two more questions. So I'll take one from here. Neil, I have to take yours, and then one from here, and I'll meet you outside for the others. Okay.
Hi, Patty. Neil Sarkar from the Rhode Island Quality Institute and Brown University. One thing that I think is really important for us to emphasize is the patient. And that's where we begin, and that's where we end, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. And what I want to make sure that is on the library's radar is the implementation piece. Yep. Now, while there may not be sort of direct implementation because it's not, NIH is largely a research enterprise, making sure that the partnerships are there so that when we actually talk about implementation, it's real implementation. Because we've been, for the greater part of 60 years as a community, talking about how better we can use data for improving patient lives and improving patient care and helping physicians and other providers get their job done better. And we have yet to really deliver. And now we have a lot of angry physicians and a lot of angry other providers and patients who are actually in many ways left in the dark. And so I think it's really important to make sure that in all of this discussion that the patient stays front and center.
Thank you very much for that. And I want to call your attention to a small investment we're making in the area. The National Library of Medicine has a funding announcement on personal health libraries, which is intended to bring the power of data science into the hands of patients. It's a small step. We do not want to see, by the way, any more apps built or websites built, but we do need to know, how do we help somebody understand their genome? How do we help an individual see where they are in the process of care or take advantage of predictive modeling? So it is important. I have to say, I'm incredibly encouraged by the NIH interest in the electronic health record, that we might actually get them to realize them broadly, that there's a person on the other end of a discovery, and that person has a right to engagement. And it's interestingly enough coming out most clearly through patient access to research data. And so we're seeing the discussions moving some, but there's a lot of work to do, you're right. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Deborah McGinnis, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Great talk, great direction. I'm so behind the metadata focus and the documentation. And one request, suggestion I have, like that data registry, I would love to see a column. I took a picture. I didn't see a column. I'd love to see a picture that exposes their data schema.
Oh, yes.
And I want that data schema in a computable, ingestible form. So I want it encoded in one of the standards that machines can consume. Because I'm a knowledge representation expert, I look for those schemas, I have to dig like crazy, and if you and your organization can help put that into your policy and put that into your registries, the world would be better off, I think.
I have been encouraged by some of the conversations I've had in the last 2 weeks that some universities are moving towards computable data management plans. And as a part of those computable data management plans, having the data schema embedded. So I see a place for us. Now, I just came from a meeting with the NIH leadership, the Institute and Center directors, about the data sharing plans, and they were all talking about PDFs and text. And I said, no. These need to be computable from the beginning. We need to be able to monitor them. We need to be able to engage them. And frankly, we need to be able to expose them. And the way to expose data sharing is to start with schemas. So thank you for that. And thank you, everyone, for your work. I hope you have a successful 2 days. Thank you.
Perfect. So we do have a break, and I just want to remind people to sign up for the technical demonstrations that interest you the most. And so tomorrow we can have a plan about room size. And Lisa, were you going to add anything or not? No, okay. So let's take a 15-minute break. I think we'll start. I'm sure my panelists will forgive me on the use case panel. We'll start at 10:35. Great, thank you.